Krissy Keefer. She's running for Congress, Nancy Pelosi's seat in the 8th District.
I am an artist and activist and a mother. I have lived in San Francisco for the last 20 years. I've been performing here since 1975.
What's the nature of the performance?
I run a dance company called the Dance Brigade and a dance center at 24th and Mission called Dance Mission Theater. I've done hundreds of performances all over the United States and Europe and Latin America, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for progressive movements all over the world. I've raised a lot of money for Casa El Salvador, Nicaragua, Chile. I've done a lot of work in solidarity with the Black community. I've worked in a collective, I've worked in a partnership, and I'm a sole proprietor of a business. I do have legislative experience. I worked with Tom Amiano to create the rent legislation when all of the dance companies and businesses were being forced out of the town during the dot-com boom. I mastered legislation with Amiano's office, and he got the first 11-0 vote on the board, which allowed for the city to provide money for different organizations who were being kicked out of their buildings. It was called the rent subsidy legislation. The majority of voters in San Francisco would like to see the impeachment of George Bush. They'd like us to get the troops out of Iraq. I'm also very distressed that Congress hasn't done anything about the perils of global warming. They've known the polar ice caps have been melting for the last 10 years, and there hasn't been any legislation whatsoever. They provided zero leadership on the issues of global warming, and we all know that sitting here because they're all machinating right now all over the place trying to make a difference.
And so those are your issues.
My issues.
Global warming,
yeah.
The war in Iraq.
Yeah, and impeachment of the president.
And impeachment of the president.
Yeah.
Don't you think that Nancy Pelosi is doing a good service as being House leader of the minority party?
No, I actually think the middle-of-the-road Democratic Party is one of the biggest impediments to social change right now. I really believe that we should stop coalescing around the most pathetic kind of values, and people should be standing up long and hard against torture. For example, we've let this thing go on and on. We have the most hideous kind of news. That war in Iraq is a travesty for the peoples of the world. We all know it. And Nancy Pelosi has voted for every single war appropriations to the point where we've spent $500 billion in Iraq with nothing to show for it except for the devastation of that entire country and the death of 2,600 soldiers. And we should get out in the next 6 months. We should get out. She hasn't led around that at all. Woolsey has led around that. Barbara Lee's led around that. Well, I think San Francisco are some of the most forward-thinking voters in the United States. Our area, particularly San Francisco, along with Oakland and Berkeley, lay claim to some of the greatest social change movements in this country, including the Black Panther Party, the Longshoremen, the Beat Poets. I mean, we can go on and on about what has come out of the Bay Area, and I think we are all proud to hold on to the progressive mantle. So I don't know how you characterize yourself right now, but I think that San Francisco has always had a rallying cry for peace and justice, and that we want to drive a wedge between us and the Bush administration, which is one of the most hideous governments that this United States has ever seen. Nancy Pelosi voted for the Patriot Act. Now, do we say, well, we need to come together and all rally around the Patriot Act, or do we want our elected leaders out of San Francisco to vote against the Patriot Act? We're trying to push the leadership to have a different view on how they should be responding to the president. Clearly, the president over and over says you're either with us or you're against us. You're either on the ship that I'm moving on or you're anti-American. And what we're saying is dissent is necessary in order to have a democracy, that you have to shake and as somebody said this morning, you have to force your leadership, your elected officials, to do the right thing. And clearly we saw a complete collapse in the Congress over the last 8 years. Well, sure. My goal of my life is to move people as one great, throbbing aspiration for social justice. Absolutely, that is the goal of. That's
throbbing
my
aspiration
for social justice. Yes, I would like to see things very different from the way they are. I would like to see economic justice in the African American community, of which they've never been able to get in the history of the United States. There's lots and lots of unfinished business from the 60s. I'd like to see women have a full participation in the government. There's, the Board of Supervisors, for example, is mostly men. I mean, you've got all kinds of problems that still exist. The prison industrial complex, for example, is a hideous scar on our democracy. So yeah, I feel like our elected leadership should be doing a much better job. Well, first I'd just like to say that half of the people that are registered that are able to vote don't vote in the United States. That is a severe problem, and that's a reflection of the corruption all over the spectrum. The United States people consume 47% of the world's resources. That's another problem that we've got to deal with. We're going to be facing peak oil. Where's the problems about that. There's going to be a lot of forced migration because of the polar ice caps. Our elected officials, none of them, are looking at the real problems and trying to deal with them for real.
And let's talk to Mr. Brown or Ms. Brown. You're on the Quake. Hello.
Yeah, are you going to let Bush off, Krissy? How about some kind of a law where you can take away the presidential power of pardon? Obviously, this guy is trying to get he and Cheney off. That's what he's pushing Congress for now.
Well, yeah, I think there's a kind of a rumbling that Bush is trying to change the laws on torture so that if there is a Democratic Congress that and they start the impeachment processes, or that they start going into his behavior, that he will not be found guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors or breaking the law by torturing people all over the world. We can't even believe this has gone on. So yeah, I would try to prevent, go in there and try to draft such some legislation that would prevent a presidential pardon, these guys from pardoning each other and some of the worst criminals. Let's get real about what this government's done over the last 8 years.
Well, that's part of his military tribunal reform, is that he wants to make it retroactive to what has been done already.
Right.
Which is reprehensible.
Yeah. I just wish Nancy Pelosi had the same politics as Barbara Lee or Woolsey or Dennis Kucinich or some of the others who've actually drawn a line between them and the Bush administration.